Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are lobbying hard for major changes to the regulations next season because Flexi-Wings have been a major talking point of the last several months, especially on the McLaren side. Their rear wing in Baku, their front wing around many other circuits. Red Bull haven't been using the flexibility to this degree. They are lobbying hard for the FIA to change the rules next year to outlaw the Flexi-Wings that we are currently seeing and bring in new static load tests to effectively outlaw what a lot of these teams are currently doing. If it goes through, Red Bull are set to benefit massively. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes will all have to make some serious changes, but of course those teams don't want this to happen. What's the FIA going to decide? Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, we saw this confirmation today. The Dutch Grand Prix is coming back and then it's disappearing. So they're extending the contract until 2026, and after 2026 it's gone seemingly forever. Now I'm not exactly sure why this decision is being made from both sides. Formula 1 are clear to point out here, this is not their decision, at least that's what they say. They say the decision has been taken by the promoter not to remain on the calendar after 2026. So, look, whether it comes down to money at the end of the day, and the reality is that Formula 1 is getting offers left, right and centre from multiple countries and circuits and regions to do a race there instead. And if certain races can't afford to hit F1's new numbers, then they may have to say, because, would the Dutch Grand Prix still be going if it was much cheaper to pay F1, basically, is how it goes, to license to make it happen? Possibly, yes. But, for whatever reason, the Dutch Grand Prix will cease in 2026. It's a pretty big deal because I think it's a good Grand Prix. It's not my favourite circuit or Grand Prix in general, but it's a massive sporting event in the Netherlands. Certainly because Max Verstappen has now won the title for several years in a row and is an absolute national hero there. I mean, these shots are pretty mega, and it's always a massive party atmosphere around Formula 1 that weekend in Zandvoort on the coast in the Netherlands. But, it's going to be gone in a couple of years. We get 25, we get 26, and then it's out of there. And it seems like in the 2026 edition, it's going to have a sprint race as well as kind of like the finale. I don't know if that's going to go well or not. I don't think it's the best track for racing, although I will say the addition of the DRS onto the banking this most recent year or so has made a massive improvement. And I do enjoy the track. I think it's exciting in the sense that it's got a couple of banked corners. It's not the best for wheel-to-wheel racing through most of the lap, but also it can be a bit unpredictable. The weather there could obviously throw a bit of a spanner in the works, and it has produced entertaining Grand Prix in the past sometimes. So what exactly is going to replace the Dutch Grand Prix? That's a question. Is it going to be another race in the Middle East? I know that's been talked about. Is it going to be, another kind of, Korea's been mentioned as a potential country, or South Africa or something? We don't really know what the plan is over the next couple of years, but there's definitely interest. But I think it is a well-loved race by Formula 1 fans. So the idea of it leaving depends maybe what comes in instead. But we also know that it's not like it's a guarantee that every other European race is staying as well. We know that there's talk about basically rotating European races and maybe doing Imola one year and then not the next, and then maybe doing Spa one year and not the next, which is a particular concern of mine. And if you look at the calendar in terms of how long the contracts are with various different circuits, you'll find that basically all of the circuits with the shortest contracts are the best circuits. You're talking Spa, Silverstone, Suzuka, stuff like this. So that is a bit of a concern as far as I'm concerned. Let's talk about what Joe Soward has to say. Just a quick point really on Hyundai, because there has been talk over the last few days. The new Formula 1 team is coming in. Of course, it's not called Andretti technically anymore. It's the General Motors Cadillac F1 entry. They're in as the 11th team. The FIA and Formula 1, look, if they're adding one new team, why not two? It's not impossible to imagine that in the next, 4 to 5 years, we actually have 12 teams on the grid. If you're going to allow 11, and that's going to happen, then, a 12th one, if it ticks the boxes, could be viable. And there has been rumours about a Hyundai Formula 1 entry. So Cyril, who used to, working with Alpine and various other teams over the years. They were called Renault, of course, when he was in charge over there. But they are introducing this new Genesis, basically like hypercar program. And just to make it clear, that is part of Hyundai, right? So, yeah, they're targeting a 2026 WEC effort. And obviously people have been speculating whether maybe a Formula 1 entry down the line could be feasible as well. They can't do everything. I mean, maybe they can, but there's only so many resources and money money to go around, but it has been a conversation because this is what they're doing, Hyundai, and Joe Soward says that I'm off to Dubai for something not yet related to F1, but he makes it clear that, not yet, it kind of implying that Hyundai Formula 1 is something that is at least in consideration over the next few years. Didn't mention this yesterday, but I thought I would today just because I thought it was kind of funny when he messed about Ocon. Of course, he's been let go a race early by Alpine. Jack Doohan's coming in instead. And he talked a lot about his time at the team, of course, him stepping away now. I thought it was interesting what he had to say about his departure and how this is clearly not his decision. Like, this is not something that was planned, because Alpine were kind of saying, oh, well, we're letting him go now so that he can do the post-season test with Haas, his next team for next year. But clearly, this wouldn't have been the way that he wanted it, because he actually makes this very clear publicly to the hundreds of hardworking men and women at Enstone and Viry. I apologise that I will not be able to come and see you in person or have a proper farewell. As you know, the plan was always to race one last time this weekend and personally say goodbye to all of you next week. I was looking forward to both of those things. This is not how I wanted things to end. So, yeah, quite the statement I thought from Ocon, really, making it very clear that, yeah, he's basically been fired and dropped by the team in nonetheless controversial circumstances. He will be replaced next year by Jack Doohan, we think, unless Doohan has a terrible time at Abu Dhabi and maybe Colapinto has a big bounce back weekend, then they might do something there. Bortoletto is getting next year's drive at Sauber alongside Hülkenberg, of course. He may win this year's Formula 2 title. It also may go to Isaac Hadjar. I think Paul Aron technically is still in with the shout as well. But it's likely going to be one of these two. Hadjar, of course, Red Bull man. And it's pretty likely he's going to end up replacing Lawson in the RB for next year, assuming Lawson is the man that goes to Red Bull to replace Perez, as is the present rumour. Now, Hadjar's an interesting driver. He's pretty good. I wonder how he'll fare in Formula 1. He did I think he did an FP1 in Silverstone, didn't he, this year? And he just wasn't very impressive to Red Bull, which was concerning. But obviously, like, his simulator numbers and stuff like this will be relevant as well. I think ideally, if Arvid Lindblad was old enough to put him in the car, they'd love to do that, but he's a couple of years too young, although he's a very promising young talent and definitely a name to keep your eyes out for over the next couple of years. But it's also funny because Red Bull seem to have their concerns about Yuki because of, his radio outbursts and stuff like this, and maybe not really keeping a level head all the time, although I think he's got better at that. If you're an enjoyer of Yuki Tsunoda radio outbursts, then, you're going to love Isaac Hadjar, because this guy on the radio is also entertaining. So he's probably, both of these guys are going to be in the sport next year. And also for Red Bull, if they don't sign Hadjar, if he wins Formula 2, it's just kind of like a bad look for their rookie program, that even if their, junior driver won the Formula 2, they're still not going to sign him. So they probably will, is the conclusion here. And we're going to have, more rookies and younger drivers on the grid, which I'm not going to complain about. More crashes, more drama, as far as I'm concerned. Just to maybe close the loop on that Red Bull story for the day, Fox Sports Mexico are reporting that Checo Perez out of Red Bull is a done deal. So we heard it from ESPN, the race, and other sources over the last couple of days. Now a Mexican publication is saying basically the same thing, which is pretty telling, I would say. If there's rumours in Mexico that this is going to happen, Red Bull have decided not to continue with Perez, and everything coming out of Christian Horner's mouth over the last couple of weeks has implied exactly that. He will be leaving the team after Abu Dhabi, they say, and his reaction to their decision will determine the manner in which their relationship will end. Now that's pretty interesting, right? Because, look, Perez has a contract for another couple of years. If I'm Sergio Perez, what Red Bull want Perez to do is just retire and say, look, it's not happening for me now. I'm going to step away. And therefore, Red Bull don't have to pay him out any money to sever his contract, because he'd effectively be severing it himself. If I'm Perez, I ain't doing that. Like, they sign me to an extension, they're going to have to pay me however many $1 million to get me out of there. That's what I'd be doing. I don't think that's what Perez should do. So I think even there was rumours a couple of weeks ago now that Perez wants 20 million for them to resolve this situation. So if I'm Checo, I'm like, look, guys, you signed me to a contract. Yeah, I've not done great, but obviously, it's a bit of an understatement, to be fair. But if you want to kick me out of the team, having given me a contract, and we both signed it a couple of months ago, then I'm not just going to leave for free. But obviously, Red Bull will say, oh, well, Checo, if you just retire graciously, actually, then we'll give you a nice ambassadorial role or something like that. And that will be the discussion there, because Red Bull will say, look, we can pay you this money to leave, but then we're not going to maintain our relationship with you after that. But you can, retire and do it in the way that we would like you to do it. And then, you can stay as an ambassador. And that's a pretty compelling proposition, I would say, to Perez. But, equally, how much pride does he want to have in this situation, right? I don't know. Intuit your perspective in the comments section below. We also have this weekend. Arthur Leclerc and Charles Leclerc will both be taking part in Friday's FP1 as teammates. And this is historic. The first brothers to ever take part in an F1 session as teammates, which is pretty legendary stuff. And, of course, it's going to happen with Charles and Arthur. Now, Arthur's a competent driver. Not as good as Charles, in my opinion, but it does seem like he's effectively going to be taking on reserve, a reserve role at Ferrari for the upcoming season. It doesn't look like it's going to be Zhou Guanyu, at least according to latest rumours. And I thought these are some really nice words here from Charles Leclerc as well. So that's a real must-see, I guess, in the FP1 session on Friday for Abu Dhabi. And of course, it's on a weekend where Ferrari are attempting to win the World Constructors' Championship. I saw a pretty cool bit of trivia about that as well. Sainz is very close to Piastri in the championship. Norris is very close to Leclerc in the championship. It is possible that Norris and Leclerc finished together, but Norris is ahead in second place, and Piastri is just ahead of Sainz, but marginally to such an extent that Ferrari still win the Constructors because Oliver Behrman scored 6 points at the start of the season. So that would be kind of remarkable. It's possible in Abu Dhabi, although I will say it's rather unlikely, especially because Verstappen has been imperious, generally, around this circuit over the last several years. Quickly on Ferrari, they don't have another experimental spec. They tried it over the last couple of rounds. It's kind of worked, kind of not. At times, it's kind of depended, really. Sometimes that Ferrari has looked indomitable in Charles Leclerc's hands with the new experimental floor package, but it's not always been the case. So, look, it's experimental for a reason. Ferrari are trying to learn from it for next year. There are some upsides. There are seemingly some downsides. But what I wanted to get into was the drama that Red Bull are once again causing, or at least contributing to, with regard to flexible wings. Now, Flexi-Wings have always been a thing in Formula 1. It's never going to go away because you can't make these components perfectly rigid because otherwise they'll just break under aerodynamic load. There's always going to be some sort of flexibility. But as we know, the flexibility is tested statically when the car is on the ground. They, put a Newton meter or whatever on the wing. They press down with some sort of implement and they analyze whether, how far the wing is deflecting with that amount of load. Now, the question is that amount of load they're testing for actually what you see when the car's traveling at 220 miles an hour? The teams also know where the static load tests are going to be taking place, so they can maybe strengthen those areas, but other parts of the wing are weaker, shall we say. And also, when the car's moving at very high speeds, the conditions of the aeroflow are also going to be different to what you see statically anyway. So the teams have always been able to exploit this grey area and allow a wing that at ground level, when, not ground level, you know what I mean, when things are static and tested in the lab, they're okay, but when they're used out on the circuit, they give more advantage, right? I mean, this is we saw with the McLaren in Baku, with the very flexible DRS panel, the mini DRS people were calling it, given an extra 3 kph over, well, what they would normally have been capable of with a rear wing that wasn't doing exactly this. And you can see how far it's kind of going down as well, dropping down effectively to lower the drag in a straight line. It's very clever aerodynamics, the mechanics and the engineers that work on stuff like this, incredibly talented. But Red Bull are going to say, look, that's not fair, as to be fair did Ferrari shortly after this as well. Now, it's also worth remembering that Red Bull and Mercedes, especially, Red Bull at a time, were, using this for a long time, right? I mean, we saw Red Bull played around with this a couple of years ago. They were kind of like one of the big teams that got into, I wouldn't say hot water precisely, but they were one of the reasons why it was so hotly talked about a couple of years ago, and why certain new regulations came in was because, Red Bull were exploiting these same grey areas. Now, they've not been exploiting these grey areas quite as much. Maybe they've been exploiting other grey areas. But McLaren this season absolutely have, as have other teams as well. This was coming out back in June when it was really first talked about that Red Bull were not happy with the way that the McLaren and the Ferrari front wings were bending on the straight and in the fast corners. So they've been trying to make changes to this rule set for some time. And as of today, we got a big article here from MUS discussing that the FIA does plan to introduce more stringent load tests next year, at least for 2026 and potentially 2025 as well, to prevent teams running an even more extreme flexible wing version. The question is, how far is this going to go, and what are they going to do precisely for 2025? So this is the highlight of the article here. The FIA plans to tighten the static tests for all wings starting in 2025, but the limits of that are still being discussed. Hardliners demand a complete ban on targeted bending, while others advocate for maintaining the status quo. The issue is brought up in the most recent commission. So Red Bull are the hardliners here, and presumably the lesser teams as well, like, you know, the Saubers and stuff, that they've probably not really been messing with Flexi-Wings too much, I would imagine. So anyway, Red Bull haven't been doing so much either, and you've got to assume that what they're saying is for their own benefits, because that's always how things are. So I think we can relatively easily assume, because of this, Red Bull haven't been exploiting this much. The other teams probably have, because, you know, that, otherwise, why would Red Bull be doing this? And the other teams are defending against what they've been doing. So it's classic Formula 1 politics. But Red Bull are demanding the load tests for all the wings are tightened so that any targeted bending is no longer possible. Now, of course, that's never fully possible, as we know, to have no flexibility in bending at all, but they're going to try and make that point as much as they possibly can. However, the other teams are saying, look, for cost cap related reasons, certainly because, you know, development for next year has already begun, we should just freeze where it currently is and say, look, the way that it currently is, let's just leave it at that, because if we've developed a wing already for next year, which many teams have already been working on, of course, if that wing is useless, you know, they've wasted a load of money, and it's not been clear what it was going to be like for next year until it's been discussed now. So most teams are saying, look, let's just leave it as it is, but if it gets any worse, let's prevent that from happening. But of course, the teams are at conflict over this as ever. So the FIA are being urged to make a quick decision, because the wings in 2025 will go into production. The team have already spent time and money developing them, but of course in January, that's when they start actually making them, really. So obviously with budget cap pressure, no one wants to build a wing that's going to be useless. So they've got to make a call on this. But it seems pretty straightforward to me. Red Bull want the rules to change, to tighten them up substantially. The other teams would mostly be happy to say, let's leave it as it is. Red Bull are welcome to do this as well, but of course it's effort for Red Bull because they've got to develop things. So McLaren would likely lose the most. They've been exploiting this grey area the most, to our understanding. It's not the only reason their car's been fast, but it is certainly one of the reasons why their car has been fast. So it's expected that if this was to happen, McLaren would probably suffer the most. Mercedes, Ferrari, Haas, Alpine, they've also been using this to some extent. They'd also take some sort of a hit, and Red Bull therefore would be among the beneficiaries. So that's the question for you guys. What are the FIA going to do? Are they going to side with Red Bull and say, okay, we are going to test harder? Although I will say that over the last couple of years, the FIA's default response to these situations has been, well, that sounds like a bit more effort, guys. We've got to redesign the load tests, and maybe let's just do that in 2026 and kick the can down the road. That would be my expected outcome, is that they'll just say, all right, Horner, I get what you're trying to say, but you're free to do what the other teams are doing as well for next year, and then we'll tighten it up properly in 2026. That might be what they say. They might say, all right, other teams, Red Bull are right, we're going to tighten these up right about now, and you know, a lot of your development work has kind of gone to waste, which would help Red Bull for next year. I think that's the conclusion here, right? That Red Bull would love to be in a situation where this happens and the McLaren, the Ferrari wings are less flexible next year than they are now. And maybe that's one of Red Bull's only ways to really put together a competent championship challenge next season, because over the last, you know, 13, 14 rounds, it's not been especially pretty for that team. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Just wanted to close out with a couple of things, because there's been lots of social presence around Hamilton's final race with Mercedes, of course, coming up this weekend. Thought this was kind of cool. I'm pretty sure on his Instagram, he changed his profile picture to basically when he first joined Mercedes, right, back in 2013. I thought it was kind of cool. This is another comparison of the 11 or so years that they have now had together. It's not really ending in the way that he would have liked it to end, but of course Abu Dhabi is another race, and we'll see how it plays out this weekend. These are your power rankings for the weekend as well. Always controversial. I definitely think Verstappen deserved the #1 spot here, but hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.